Meeting of the AMS Policy Committee to order. The time is 1:31 p.m. Roll call real quick. Ms. Alto.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Probably here. Spoken is absent, but I'm here. But we have a quorum. So we're on that here. Do you have any public involvement announcement?
Yes, AMS committee meetings are open to the public and the public is provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. Business items are first presented by staff or consultant. After that, the committee is able to discuss the business items. Then the public is invited to formally comment. Each participant will have 3 minutes to speak on their topic. Couple of housekeeping items. If you're joining us virtually and you're not a member of the committee, please turn your camera off when you're not speaking on an item. If you're joining us by phone, to mute and unmute the microphone, press *6. Thank you.
Let's see the agenda, so let's get to that real quick. All it's up. So,
Yeah, move to amend the agenda under 6, adding 6B to be an update on the 36th Avenue project.
Second. Second? Second. Okay. Any objection to adding that to the agenda? Oh, and for the record, substitute for Emma Pokin is now here. Again. Okay, any objections to adopting the agenda as amended? The agenda is approved. Be added. They neglected to put it on 36. Okay. Oh, agenda. Okay. Agenda item number 4. We've got before us minutes from August 25th, 2022 and September 22nd, 2022 for approval. We have a motion for regarding these minutes.
So moved.
Seconded. Any changes or discussions on the minutes?
I don't know if it matters, but my position's changed. I'm now chief of staff, so I don't know if that matters or not.
What was the effective date?
September 14th.
So the August the September minutes. They need to be amended.
Yeah, or maybe it doesn't matter.
Any other changes or discussions?
We could just do that as staff level change.
That's not involved. That change, any objections to approving the minutes? The August 25th, 2022 and September 22nd, 2022. As amended minutes are approved. Okay, into the action items. Action item 5A, the UPWP fiscal year 23 budget. Aaron, will you be chatting with us?
Yes, I will. Okay, everyone. So the Unified Planning Work Program is the AMAS's staff time anticipated to be spent over the next year or so. So in front of you, there's 2 things. The paper document is the 22 budget, so you can see what that looks like. And the electronic version online is the 23 additions to that. One thing that's, I'm not sure what that was, but maybe somebody moving something. There is a change to kind of how we're doing the budgets for the UPWP because we're actually moving to a 2-year cycle instead of a 1-year cycle. This better aligns with the state in terms of doing 2 years at a time. It's a lot easier for us because then we just approve the budget once at the beginning and then make any amendments as we need. So this one is adding the $23 amounts. Basically, it's just doubling all the amounts from the 22 as the numbers have been mostly the same. There's a bit of an increase in the UPWP funding. So going through just a couple of items of note, all of the contractual services for the 100s, 200s section, those are for projects that are already underway that needed a little bit of extra funding because of the state ICAP rate change. So the ICAP rate went up, which means there was less funding for the projects. And so we had a little extra money available to help offset that and keep the projects whole without having to impact the schedules for those projects. We have some contractual service information in there for TransCAD modeling. So that's our modeling that we do for the MTP and other modeling efforts that we need. Then in the 500s, we have some staff development and training for contractual services. So that's when we go to conferences. For example, when we're leaving for Ample conference next week, that would charge for that amount. And then there's money in there for public involvement and outreach. That'll be going towards the public input software that we're going to be purchasing here, hopefully soon, once it's all approved. That software is hopefully going to help us with improving our public outreach, kind of consolidating all of our public outreach into one program instead of having it under a bunch of different areas, and allow us to make unified websites for projects and things like that, all in one location to where we control it, we archive it, and it doesn't just disappear after the project is done. So you'll be hearing more about that when it comes online, hopefully soon. A lot of the additions were into things like the TIP, the MTP, the safety plan that we're going to be starting work on, the street topologies, complete streets plan that we hope to be starting work on. This is all staff time for tasks within the next year or so. There's another change that happened recently, as outlined in the memo. And it's dealing with the 5303 funds that historically went directly to the Public Transportation Department. Normally what happens is the Public Transportation Department or the state of Alaska apply for those funds from FTA, and then it goes through the state to the Public Transportation Department. The state decided that they wanted to change to that and to do a consolidated planning grant. So basically all of the funding, both the PL funding that goes to staff, AMAT staff time, and the 5303 funds is going to come in one grant to AMATs. And then we distribute the funding accordingly. Staff and the TAC are recommending that we provide all the 5303 funding to Public Transportation Department for them to continue doing their efforts that they've been doing all these years, which you can see in the budget under the 5303 line, the blue line to transit. There is a benefit to this, just before anyone's too upset. What it does is it allows this funding to utilize FHWA's lower match rate. So FTA's match rate is 80-20. DOT, our match rate for FHWA is 90.97, 9.03%. So basically makes more funding available federal to the Public Transportation Department for the tasks that they have outlined in the UPWP. This consolidated planning grant is something that will be going forward. So you'll be seeing it for the next UPWP for 24 and 25. So that's all I had. I'm here, of course, for questions. If you have any, thank you.
Real quick, maybe. Rates, the ICAP rates change.
I believe it was 4 point something and it went up to 7 point something. So it was a pretty substantial increase for the ICAP rate changes. It's pretty normal for the ICAP rates to change from year to year, state fiscal year.
There's some kind of an explanation for that ICAP rate change.
I have to refer to James Starzyk if he can, help answer that as to why the ICAP rate increased for the state.
James Starzyk, Central Region Planning. Yeah, from my understanding of how the ICAP adjustments get made is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but finance takes the accounting from the previous year and takes what was charged as like staff time, the actual things that ICAP is meant to pay for, and then kind of guesses as to just how, uses that to make an assumption on what the rate needs to be in the coming year to make it balance out. And so if they find that last year's rate was a little too low to handle the overhead, they adjust it upwards. And if they collected more ICAP than was needed, then they reduce it. That's my understanding of.
That's kind of a process-driven response. I guess what I'm looking for, and really it's for the policy board writ large. If somebody calls me and doubles their overhead rates tomorrow, I would want not an explanation of how or what the function of that is. I would want an explanation of why that rate almost doubled. And so maybe you could go back and find out the causal factors. I know they eliminated all the CAP programs, the cost allocation programs in DOT. I think that was one one thing that created an increase in the overhead rates, but I don't know for sure. So again, I think it's important for transparency. I would ask the same thing of the muni if they doubled their rates and they were carving off more funds out of grant funds. So maybe you could go back, James, and next month to bring us a little bit more of a detailed explanation of why the rate was done.
Certainly.
Yeah, because that rate's been below 5% over ever. So, and maybe it's the elimination of the cost allocation plans. And maybe that's the bulk. I think it'd be helpful also. Okay.
Aaron, we're on the 2022-2023 unified work plan. Is the P305 funds reflected? I'm just not finding it, or is it not reflected in a way that I would identify them because it was just changing the manner and not the funding?
It's the 5303 column. So it's the blue column that says
Oh, it says
FTA 5303.
Illinois Transit?
Yes,
So they're all transit related.
yes, they are.
Okay, that's what was throwing me off.
Which is why we're recommending it just go directly to the Public Transportation Department. How it works for a lot of other MPOs is MPOs get these consolidated grants and then the MPO staff itself does the transit planning. But because the Muni has its own transit department, we're recommending that all that funding just goes to them to continue doing all their efforts they have been doing.
And then the allocations under that, are those dictated by the fund or are these allocations recommended by them or?
Their allocation, the amounts that you see in the columns, those were recommendations from the Public Transportation Department,
Okay,
based on how much funding they have available.
okay, so however they want to leverage that with.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, Aaron, could you just reiterate, so you had said that, you know, the paper we have is 2022 budget, the total budget is 5.775 million. And in the electronic version, it's the 2-year budget, it's 10.7 million. And you'd said, you know, that's about double, but it's not, of course, it's about $800,000 different from what the doubling would be. So what are the sort of largest pieces of that delta, that explain that $800,000 delta?
Well, a lot of that actually doesn't come from the UPWP funds itself. So in the UPWP, you'll notice there's a column in there that says FHWA STP to AMAS. So that's the TIP funding going towards certain projects that are listed in our UPWP for tasks. So we reflect how much TIP funding is going to those tasks. And that is where a substantial amount of that increase happened, is the TIP funding increased for it. Staff's time increased a little bit. We actually, I forgot to tell you, but I did want to mention this, that we're recommending adding a new position to AMATS, a planning technician position, to help us with research of tasks, help us with GIS work. So that $150,000 increase or so came just kind of a natural increase in the UPWP, but there wasn't an $800,000 increase for the actual PL.
Well, no, I mean, it's a decrease, right? That's what I'm saying. If you were to take that number and double it, you'd get somewhere north of like 11.5 million. But your actual double number is
Oh, yeah.
10.7 million. So what, at least looking at this, it looks like there's an $800,000 decrease, but you're saying that that's not the case.
No, I said it's mostly doubling, but it's not really doubling it. It's just adding another year's worth of funding on top of it. I should have been more clear on that.
So you are anticipating significantly less funding in 2023 than in 2022.
Not for staff time. Because there's so much other funding that goes into here, staff time actually received a small increase. Because of the new infrastructure bill that came out, there was a little bit of additional funding. That's why we're recommending adding a new position in. But for some of the other funds, it would have been a decrease. I can go back and find out the exact.
I mean, I guess I'm just curious, is there anything that stands out? Is there any one thing that is getting significantly less funding in 2023 than 2022?
Not for any of our tasks. Sorry, I'm just kind of looking through really quickly. None of our tasks are underfunded or impacted by it. It could be something that was, maybe the TIP funding wasn't as great as we thought it was going to be. But I can look into it some more and try and find that info for you if you want.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And any comments or questions from the public on the UPWP? Christina, or folks online?
Online, but no questions.
Okay. Regarding the UPWP, what is the will of the committee? Move to approve. Second. Objection to approving the motion. No. Motion is approved. UPWP is approved. Okay. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
But wait, there's more. Action item 5B, Aaron. The Freight Advisory Committee nomination. So,
I will actually go ahead and turn this over to John Cecil, who is the staff to the Freight Advisory Committee.
Good afternoon. So the Freight Advisory Committee, which meets 4 times a year, has recently had a resignation from one of their longtime members. And so we have an individual, Eddie Walton from Madison, who has been recommended to fill that seat, which represents freight haulers. And so that is staff and the TAC have recommended his appointment, or approval for his appointment to you. Any questions?
did we ever get a resume?
You do have one on the iPads.
According to his resume, if I may, so from 1977 to 2015, he worked for Sealand and CSX and Horizon Lines, and then in 2015 to the current, he's been Real Bell Logistics Manager and Director for NASA.
Thank you. Mr. Cecil, is there, for this committee, are there specified seats that has to be filled by certain people? And if so, what seat is he filling?
Correct. There are specified seats, unlike some of the other committees. So that seat, I believe, is the freight hauler seat.
Can you just, do you recall off the top of your head any of the other seats that have to be filled or any specific?
Yeah, so if I may, a couple of them, one is from UAA, and that's Dan Prokop, Professor of Logistics at their program. Steve Rabaffo from the port. We have a planner, Terry. Sorry, I don't have all the names, but she's a planner from the airport, represents Ted Stevens. There's a gentleman from Princess Cruise Lines that represents the tourism sector. And then there's a couple of other individuals that relate to freight trucking. Joe Michelle is the chairman. He's the director of the executive director of the Alaska Trucking Association.
Mhm. Are there any, just out of curiosity, are there any public seats, any seats as there are in some other committees for people that aren't directly involved in this?
There's not. There's not. And I don't know why that is or isn't, but I think because the function of the committee is so specific that it would be, I mean, I guess you could have a member of the public who is interested in freight kind of issues that would be helpful perhaps, but the gist of the committee though is very technical and related to freight logistics.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments by the committee? Any comments from the public on Freight Advisory Committee nomination? Oh, regarding this issue, what is the will of the committee? Moved and seconded. Any objections to approving the motion?
Thank you.
Hearing none, the motion is approved. Thank you. All right, last action item 5C, travel time reliability targets. 9%. Thank you. We'll be talking.
Yes, sir. I will be the one kind of presenting on this really quickly. Okay, everyone. So these are the travel time reliability targets. we've seen these targets before in the past. 2018, I believe, is the last time we saw these. And so these are targets for reliability on the interstate, non-interstate NHS, and then freight travel time reliability on the interstate. So these targets are for a pretty limited set of the transportation system, a large but limited set of the transportation system that's predominantly managed and maintained by DOT. So DOT is required to set targets, and then AMATs either can adopt their own targets or support the state in their adopted targets. So before you is a memo that outlines the targets, which they are for the 2 and 4 years. So this is for the 22 through 26 periods. So the 2-year target's 2022 or 2024, so 2 years after the 22, and then the 4-year target is 2026, 4 years after the period. In the memo, there's actually a link to FHWA's reporting system on these targets. So the past 2-year targets were 92 for both the 2 and 4-year targets. So you can see kind of where they're at. They're about the same. They're the same this go around. And looking at the last ones, the state was able to meet these targets. They were able to get 95, almost 95 for the 2-year, and then a little above 95 after that. So basically it's saying how reliable is the system for the interstate and non-NHS, and 95 to 92% of the time it'll be reliable. There's additional information about how these targets are calculated, if you would like, in the DOT's memo that is attached. The Technical Advisory Committee reviewed these targets and recommended supporting the state in their 2 and 4-year targets. So before you today, and I'm here if you have any questions. Thank you.
Comments from the public? This item. Oh, Mr. Dunbar.
So when you were when they're calculating travel time and reliability, I mean, I guess it's very briefly, can you sort of describe more vernacular what that actually means? Because I think I understand, but can you describe a little bit more clearly?
It's the consistency or dependability of travel times as measured from day to day. So you basically say, it takes me 10 minutes to get from here to here, that 92 to whatever the target is, % of the time, I will be able to ensure that my travel will be that exact amount of time.
And so so for example, if you were to reduce travel speeds along the road, say Tudor, for example, if that were to go from 50 to 40 or 45 to 35, is that taken into account? That is to say, well, it doesn't impact your reliability because now we have said you're supposed to take longer to go through this area. Or are you penalized if you try to drop speeds like that?
Sorry, I'm just looking through what they recommend. And the calculations are based on percentage of person miles traveled on the interstate that are reliable. It's an 50th percentile, and then it's converted to person miles using it. So I don't know if speed factors into that. I'm looking to see if anyone else knows, but I don't think so. So I don't believe speed would be an issue because like you said, you're still in that reliability factor. Because even if you reduce the speeds down to 35, well, how long is it going to take you at 35 miles an hour to get from one location to the next? And how often are you able to reliably utilize that? I can follow up after this to see if speeds are factored into this one or not.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious how that it's calculated. You know. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments in general? Regarding the subject, what is the will? Seconded. Any objections to approve the motion?
Are we approving a motion or are we accepting something? What are we actually approving? We're accepting the report or are we approving a motion? I don't know if it's a good point.
Right, not really approving, we're just moving to accept the report. Move to accept.
Second.
The objections to accepting. Hearing none, we have accepted this document. Okay. So, clean.
Thank you.
All right, any other action items at this point?
No other action items?
Okay. So let's move on to item 6A, state long range transportation planning. Aaron.
I will not be. I'm looking around to see if somebody is on. Yes, I believe Claire is on. So if you would switch over. Just a second, Claire. Okay, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Claire now, who's part of the project team. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me this afternoon. Before I get too far, can I just confirm everyone can see the slides I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. Well, yeah, I'll just be taking about 10 minutes this afternoon to talk to this group about the public review drafts of the Alaska Long Range Transportation Plan and Freight Plan, as well as the corresponding virtual open houses that are live through the end of this month, October. So for those of you that may not know me, my name is Claire Doherty. I'm a transportation engineer with Kittleson and Associates, and we're working in coordination with DOT statewide planning, leading a consultant team that's helping statewide planning. I think we've got Eric Taylor on the line. He's our project manager, working with statewide planning to update the statewide long-range transportation plans and freight plans, which are policy plans required of all states by FHWA. We've got Eric on the line, and then our project team also includes Michael Baker International, who's leading the rail, air, marine, and freight analysis, Northern Economics, and Huddle AK, who's leading the public involvement and stakeholder efforts. Holly would be here today if she didn't have a conflict. So it's easy to think about transportation today, but the statewide long-range transportation plan, or what's been titled Alaska Moves 2050, is really focused on the future. The LRTP guides decisions related to state-owned multimodal transportation assets over the next 25 years. So we're looking at that 25-year horizon. And while the plan documents and acknowledges past trends, it also recognizes that's not necessarily predictive of the future. The LRTP is forward-looking so that our transportation system can be ready for what may be coming. It's thinking about a transportation system for our next generation. And of course, we've been working on this plan for about 18 months now. So we've been working through the pandemic and then also the significant new infrastructure bill that are going to have great impacts on the state transportation infrastructure in the near and midterms. So a key component within the draft LRTP, or Long Range Transportation Plan, is kind of the proposed family of transportation plans, which outlines how high-level policy direction plans should help to inform modal and system investment plans, which are then trickled down to be reflected in operating plans. So some members in this outline of plans are already in place, others will require development and implementation. And overall, the intent is to be just kind of improving and streamlining the transportation planning and investment framework at the statewide level to help strengthen and grow partnerships to help the system be more efficient. So over the course of the past 18-month plan development process, we've held 3 public outreach events to hear about concerns and priorities, to preview the plan goals, and now kind of the last major public outreach event, which is a virtual open house to walk through the plan content. Additionally, we've met with a statewide freight advisory committee and or transportation advisory committee about 10 times over the course of the project, and also had kind of a sub-technical advisory committee that helped guide a scenario planning effort, as well as have had about 15 interviews with transportation industry leaders all around the state. We've also popped into many MPO meetings, such as I am today. So there are a number of high-level local, national, and global external trends that are likely to influence the future transportation network needs in the years ahead. These drivers of change have the potential to impact all modes and the transportation network, influencing performance, demand, maintenance and operation, and funding. The most notable contributing drivers of change that we've explicitly highlighted within the plan include specialized workforces that will be needed to design, build, operate, and maintain the transportation system, reliable travel choices that support a strong and healthy community, system needs often exceeding available funding. Technology is rapidly changing how we travel and how we get our goods, and increasing weather and climate related events that disrupt our transportation systems, and it can increase costs. So the LRTP and the freight plan, so it's kind of two parallel plans, with the freight plan more focused on freight and the LRTP kind of less focused on freight and more so at the statewide multimodal look. They're focused around 10 goal areas, which are then further broken down into policies that have specific actions and performance measured to help define what needs to be done to have an efficient system with low life cycle cost, increased travel choices, and overall system resiliency. And while the actual long-range transportation plan document provides much more detailed information on each of the goal areas, I'll just kind of briefly expand on the context of each listed here. So safety means providing for and continuously improving the transportation system safety for all users. Mobility and access refers to moving people and goods efficiently and equitably. Economic vitality means planning for and investing in transportation infrastructure that supports economic growth and lowers goods and service costs. State of good repair is accounting for full system costs. Resiliency includes assessing risk and investing in solutions that help the system adapt and recover from disruptions. Sustainability is promoting a sustainable, clean, equitable system. Strategic partners means expanding coordination and collaboration with other levels of government, industry partners, and the public. Stewardship of the transportation system is referring to addressing prevailing transportation challenges using cost-effective solutions to improve overall operational efficiencies. Transportation innovation means proactively identifying and planning for innovations that have the potential to impact safety, efficient freight movement, and workforce needs. And an overall move towards performance-based management will require investing resources to improve access to data science and analytics and informatics to implement data-driven, evidence-based decision-making. And as soon as, this is my closing slide here, and so as soon as I'm done presenting, I will drop these links live in the chat. That will direct you to the online virtual open house where you can kind of preview the plan. And then there's also just the full plans themselves as documents are available on the project website. So I'll drop those links into the chat shortly. Are there any questions or comments on the plan as presented?
Questions or comments? No. Any questions or public? You must have done a great job. I don't hear any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the time.
We added item 6B, lest we forget, so I think we have Noah King from State DOT to give us an update on the Seward Highway and 36 interchange project and some kind of project related information about how that's going to play out. So Noah.
My name is Noah King. I'm a project manager with the Department of Transportation, working on that 36th Avenue interchange project. And I was asked to present a little bit about how the project is progressing, the timeline, and then a little bit generally about our right-of-way acquisition process. So I have a short presentation, then answer questions. So this project was the result of the Midtown Congestion Relief PEL study that was completed in 2020. Since that time, we've been working with state funds to work on the environmental document, which is determined to be a CE. We have selected an alternative, alternative 1, the loop ramp configuration at 36 that allows full access at 36th and the highway to go over the interchange. Sorry, Coach Rowland, could you do everything you can to not use acronyms?
Yeah, I just don't know what it means. So if there's like those kind of things, you just say it out.
I will do my best.
Thank
There are
you.
a bunch in here.
Thank you.
I'm sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Don't worry about it.
Reshare the screen so that everybody.
Sure. So NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act, and CE is categorical exclusion, or as far as those initialisms go. So currently, we're working through the environmental process and also completing the context-sensitive solutions process with the municipality. We took project to Planning and Zoning Commission for the design study report presentation in March. We had an open house after that with about 100 participants, which was a great turnout. In April, we went back to the Planning and Zoning in May for a public hearing. And then this summer, mostly we've been working on collecting data for a noise study. I think we have all the data collected now, and we're working on the analysis. The latest component of the project is that has been added to the latest STIP amendment draft, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program draft. Amendment number 5. So amendment number 5 is open for public comment currently. It will be available till October 31st for comments. The project is shown after 2023 at a budget of 102 million. So as I said, the project is currently state funded. We've been working through the environmental document with those state funds. However, inclusion in the STIP allows for federal funding to be applied to the project from multiple sources. Many acronyms represent those sources. So we're looking at a robust, multifaceted funding plan to try to project from different or normal surface transportation sources, also specific sources such as air quality, safety improvement, transportation alternative program, and then possible grant funding opportunities too with the Reconnecting Community pilot program. That's the last of the acronyms there. So, as I mentioned, the PEL, the Planning and Environmental Linkages Study for the Midtown Congestion Relief was completed in 2020. We've been slowly working on the beginning phases of preliminary engineering and the environmental document since then with the state funding. If this project was included in the finalized version of the STIP Amendment number 5, we would be able to start work on the environmental document at a more aggressive pace. We still anticipate, though, that that would take 1.5 to 2 years potentially to complete the environmental document phase of the project. After that, we'd be able to progress with final design and right-of-way acquisition. That would be another approximately 1.5 to 2 years of work, depending on how complex the right-of-way acquisition might be. Construction is very funding dependent, since it is a $100 million project. It will need funding to be secured in our somewhat limited program. And we're expecting construction after 2025. Can't really say when after that, but hopefully the funding plan will be approved by then. The second aspect that I was asked to talk about is just a general overview of our right-of-way appraisal and acquisition process. I'll say that this is a complicated aspect of project development, and I was giving a very general overview, but hopefully I'll be able to answer any questions at the end. So as preliminary design has commenced and the environmental document is being worked on, we are developing preliminary design plans, which once complete will be given to our right-of-way section to review. They can start assessing any right-of-way needs that the project might have. However, we do try to design around any right-of-way constraints. So we try to find engineering solutions to avoid acquiring extra right-of-way. Once the environmental document is complete, that's when we are able to move into the final design and request authority to proceed with appraisal and acquisition, which is our true right-of-way phase of the project. So we're anticipating the environmental document being complete sometime around 2024. After that, this phase would be able to start. So at that point, with continued refinement of the final design, we look at the potential impacts to adjacent properties and the extent of those impacts. And then that's the point when we can determine if a full acquisition or a partial acquisition would be necessary for those properties. Part of what goes into that is determining if the after condition after acquisition is consistent with land use code, and if the after condition is consistent with the previous use of the property before the acquisition took place. So when that is determined, the property will be assessed, or it will be appraised, sorry. And that appraisal will be used to determine the the actual impacts to the property and the change in value based on any aspect of the construction project. After that, we can begin negotiations with the property owner, and only after, if negotiations come to an impasse, that's when condemnation might be considered. So after all that is complete and we have all the property necessary to construct the project, we would have a right-of-way section certify that the project is ready to be constructed, and at that point, we could go out to bid. One of the last steps before construction. That is about all I have. Anybody have any questions?
Questions? Okay. We'll work, maybe you're left, right to left here, so. Ms. I'll tell you for the first every.
Okay. So when you talk about right-of-way impacts, because I think that that's been where the focus has been. So currently, that property has no longer, like, there have been some parking spaces. The permit for those parking spaces didn't transfer when the property changed ownership. So right-of-way impacts could be anything from, you know, any portion of the property, right? It could be a tiny sliver to potentially the whole thing.
It can be any portion of any adjacent property, yes.
And that won't be determined until design is done.
It won't be determined until after the environmental document is complete and design is further along in the process.
Okay. And then you mentioned something about use. Can we unpack that a little bit? Because I think this is the intersection of Title 21 and what the property is being used for at the time that the right of way is determined to be needed. So for example, you needed to take another portion of parking, and so it wouldn't meet the Title 21 parking requirements any longer. What kind of position would we be in then?
So at that point, the appraisal would take that into account, and I think there's a potential to either acquire that portion of the property and provide compensation for damages potentially to the use that it exists in currently, or if there's not a viable use, I think you can go towards the full acquisition, but I'm not.
Okay, great. And so if it's just part of a parking lot, but there were no parking minimums, so there was no required parking, then it would be just the value of the land taken because there wouldn't be any Title 21 impacts?
I believe it would be, yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
I'm just trying to figure out the intersection of these two
Yeah,
things.
so damage to the property.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, do you have any? I think I've seen them before, and years ago, sort of preliminary pictures of what this might look like, so that people that are commenting or the public can sort of understand. Do you have any preliminary drawings or anything you could share with us today of the 36th Avenue, what did you describe it as? This,
Loop ramp.
loop ramp?
I do not, they're on the project website, though, 36th Avenue Interchange.com.
We are sort of dancing around one particular property. To do the preliminary drawings with the loop ramp show a total take of that hotel?
More. Yeah.
Condemnation, I should say, of that property.
You get impact to the property.
Yeah.
By the blueprint.
What are the preliminary, what kind of impacts on that property does the initial documents show?
I believe the graphics that we presented show a small area of the pedestrian facilities touching the outside of the property on the north and west sides.
The sidewalk.
I believe so.
So not even the parking lot?
The sidewalk of the new highway facility touching the edge of the property.
Got it. Okay. But to reiterate, do the drawings take a portion of the parking lot then?
The drawings don't take anything. We haven't got to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
level of
okay.
analysis where we can determine what is
Sure. I'm trying to
actually
put this.
impacted. The drawings do overlap with a portion of the edge, I believe.
Okay. This project's included an amendment that will be, the public comment goes till Halloween, 31st of October. Can you sort of reiterate where exactly do the members of the public submit a comment?
It is on the state DOT's STIP website.
So if you were to get, say in some other case, let's say you were going by Beloved Park and you were to get a bunch of comments saying, please don't take our park. To what degree does DOT weigh those kind of public comments?
I do not believe that those kind of comments are necessarily included in the STIP amendment approval, because that hasn't been determined that there is any impact to any property on this project yet. So that seems like a not necessarily consistent comment with this level of approval for.
So when can the comment when can the public realistically make that kind of comment?
We can make that kind of comment anytime during the project.
When can they
Through the
make
project.
it, when can they make it and it be actually like evaluated, people interested in what they're saying?
Sure, it would be, at any point, we'll take it into consideration, and at the point when we have the environmental document complete, we know what property we might actually need, then it would be considered more thoroughly, because that's when we know the right of way.
So the public comment period goes to the 31st,
Just for the STIP amendment.
For the STIP amendment.
For the project is open.
and then when is the actual amendment voted on by whom? Us?
It is, I do not know, Todd, you.
No.
Van Ho, through the chair. Once the public process is done, all comments will be adjudicated. And then usually after comment adjudication, it's about a 30 to 45, I'm sorry, about 2 weeks, 2 weeks after adjudication, and the document signed by the governor.
Okay. So it's an internal DOT process.
Yes.
That's who votes on it, essentially approves the step, and then it goes to the governor.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just two questions. So you said you take into account its current use. When you go through the NEPA project, or when you go through the right-of-way acquisition, correct?
I believe that's what the appraisal takes.
Okay. So right now, it's a hotel motel under Title 21. That's its use designation. There's a desire to change that use designation to rooming house. But ultimately, the desired use would probably fall under health services. So you're looking at 3 different uses, and you're gonna look at it, whatever its current use is. You don't take into account a future potential use, correct?
I'm not sure. I cannot answer that question. I'm sorry. I believe it is the current use, but it's possible that it's.
Mr. Ball.
Bond, DOT, so when we would get to a point where we'd open the right of way phase, we would look at each specific property uniquely, through the appraisal process. A lot of times they'll look at what the best use of that property is. When we've dealt with other property owners that maybe have residential uses and now they're gonna be at the corner of an intersection, as an example, they might say it's the best use as a gas station. So during those discussions, when we get into the details and engage a property owner for any level of acquisition, we could look into proposed uses, and it wouldn't be just restricted what. So you could look at, say, like an RCA ruling and a past assembly process says we want to purchase the Golden Line ultimately for a treatment facility, which under Title 21 would probably fall under health services. You would look at it in that fashion. I think that would be part of the discussion. Okay. Okay, and then the other question I have for you is, it's $100 million project, and I guess this is just more for curiosity than anything, because this would probably apply to any project, so you have $100 million price tag, and you talk about securing funding. When you talk about securing funding, are you saying that you, for simplicity's sake, it's, yep, I got $100 million now in the bank, in my savings account, I can move forward with the project? Or is it, I have phase 1 through phase 5 and I have 1 and 2 funded and I'm just hoping that 3, 4, and 5 get funded? Like, how do you guarantee that the project is gonna start and finish and that you're like, oh, shoot, we can't move on with phase 4 because I didn't get funding? Does it make sense? I'm curious how you know that you've secured $100 million. Sure.
Hello, DOT. Yeah, so once the project is completed through design and put into our STIP planning document for funding, we would then apply federal funding mechanisms to it. We don't necessarily have to have the actual total dollar amount in the bank at that time. We have access to what we call AC, similar to what you guys use in the TIP advanced construct, but once the project is, allocated or ready for construction, we would fund the whole thing, whether it takes 1 year, 2 year, multiple phases or whatever. Once committed, it's committed.
Okay. Okay, understood.
There are time traps, federal highways time traps that occur at each of these stages.
Time trap.
Time traps, so we have so long to actually see a project to fruition.
Oh, okay.
It used to be a 10-year time trap on design. They eliminated that time trap with the most recent IIJA bill. But once you start buying right away, you enter into a 20-year time trap. And so from the time we enter into that phase of the project, we're now purchasing right away. We have 20 years to execute the construction of that project, or we have to pay back all those funds to the Federal Highway Administration
Oh,
that were
understood.
spent prior to that.
Okay.
We remind people of that because Kindergarten Crossing has a very large outstanding liability. That clock runs out in 2033. So if we choose to do nothing by 2033, Federal Highways can actually ask us for that $8 million. So
Rounding up.
that's also.
A couple more questions, because I want to get clear on the language. So this came about from a letter the chair wrote to the mayor on the 31st of August. And there was the words, it said, could be a total take of the property. Can you explain what total take means? And then what does the word condemnation mean in the context on the slide? Because that's the first time I've heard condemnation in this room talking about state DOT projects. We've always talked about right-of-way acquisition. So I just want to make sure I'm really clear on what terminology we're using.
Sure. So total take is when the impact from the project that the department is planning and executing renders the property, whether commercial or residential, unusable. So if I take enough of your residential lot that you can no longer comply with well and septic requirements, and that makes that property unusable according to codes, then I can completely purchase the property in its whole from you. So we sit down and we negotiate fair market appraisal, any administrative adjustments to that number. We negotiate moving and relocation and all those things that are contained within the Uniform Relocation Act. The right-of-way acquisition is driven by the federal Uniform Relocation. Thanks. And so does that answer the question? The total, so the total take
Becomes unusable according to local codes such as Title 21,
So Title-
water standards, sewer standards.
if we nick additional portions of the property that impact, let's say, parking spaces. And according to the code, you say, well, I'm operating this kind of facility, and by code, your impact makes it not commercially viable anymore regarding parking availability. Then you could say, I want you to completely purchase the total property from me. Or you could say, you know, I think we can still use this property. We can create a variance. We can introduce a variance for those codes. And where we don't need that much parking for the use of this property. So I just want you to buy just that sliver of property that you need for your project. So that's where the negotiation between the department and the property owner occur. And we talk about those things. Do you want us to take you out completely? Because Forrest never wanted to be on a 5-lane divided highway with his kids anymore, like on KGB Road. But maybe he's okay with losing 10 foot of his front yard, and we just buy that 10 foot and he's okay with staying. So the negotiation, we enter the department and the landowner enter into negotiations. The specter, I guess, of eminent domain or condemnation is an authority that DOT has under federal law. That if we are unable to agree on how to proceed forward with the acquisition of that acquired piece of property, we can bring in eminent domain or the condemnation of that property in the best interest of the public based on authority and necessity for that piece of property. The department would have to prove and to a judge that we have to have that property. We've done everything we can to avoid taking that property. And that's the bar that we set when we move forward with the main action.
And you still pay for it.
We still pay for it? Yeah, absolutely. And we pay everything due that landowner under the Uniform Relocation Act. And it's actually quite generous.
Okay.
So So condemnation is kind of the, where we try not to end up. But I would tell you on large projects like Canopus Bay Road, typically 2 to 3% of all the property acquisitions result in some form of contested challenge through.
And that's because you have a lot of properties you're dealing with, more versus like maybe one key linchpin property perhaps.
So and some oftentimes, when we're taking very small amounts of property, the dollar value of that take is very small. And in rural areas where property values can only be a couple $1,000s an acre, you have a landowner that might be expecting a big payday. And when they get the offer from us, which is $2,000, they're not inclined to agree to that. So we enter into negotiations. We have tools at our advantage, for high profile projects. We have, what's the title of the AIP, the Acquisition Incentive Program, in which we can, for a period of time, take the appraisal cost and offer an incentive for the property owner within 90 days to agree with our appraisal, get with the incentive, and that helps us accelerate some of these projects that are moving. That's great.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask a couple follow-up there? Yeah, so I remember my second year on the assembly, I think, maybe first or second, we did this and we did use eminent domain. We went to Superior Court for the Spinard Road project. I remember being shocked by how much we were paying people for like a little sliver of pavement, basically. You know, we were paying tens of thousands, about $70,000 for a parking space. It's really incredible costs. I will say, it occurs to me that, knock on wood, but I think the assembly is going to pass a ordinance that really significantly reduces parking requirements, maybe eliminates them. That might actually make your job significantly easier for commercial property, so you're welcome. My question on this project is, well, a couple. So I'm still trying to understand that when you start that negotiation process, what's the earliest that could happen here? Is that 2024, 2025? You said construction in 2025, but it could happen a little earlier in 2024, is that right?
It cannot happen until the environmental document is complete, and we expect 1.5 to 2 years until that document is complete.
So the earliest that process could start is 2024, realistically.
As far as
And there's nuances to that, though. If you look in the STIP Amendment 5 right now, you'll see that the construction funding, the phase 4 funding for this is illustrative. Is that correct, Todd?
It's not identified.
Not identified. We don't have a construction funding amount identified. So at this point in time, if you look at STIP Amendment 4, we don't have the money to build the $100 million. What they've done is they've given us the money for the other phases of the project, the design phase, and I believe the utility phase is in there. Is that correct? No, just the design.
Yeah.
No.
So, Todd, Van Hook, DOT, right now, the only money that we have for that project is the existing state funding. And so it depends on how far that money gets us through. No, could probably speak better to that, but yeah, once that state funding allocation is zeroed out, the project's kind of on hold until the federal funding and the STIP process has more money for the project.
And that money, how much money do you have left with that? Is that best design and planning money?
I think we've got about 3 million, a little less than 3 million in the leftover funds from the Midtown congestion that we're using to move this project forward. We don't have federal funds yet allocated to it, but all the actions that we're taking are compliant with federal requirements so that when the money is programmed, the federal money is programmed, the categorical exclusion NEPA document that will be created will be compliant with the remainder of the design phase. We couldn't technically enter into a right-of-way acquisition phase right now, because if I have to knock on your door and you say you want me to buy your $8 million hotel, I literally don't have the money to buy your $8 million. Sure, it's not programmed.
So can I ask one more question? So do STIP amendments work like TIP amendments where we put in years and the things? What is the proposed amendment to have for this project into the STIP? Is it like 24 design, 25 right away? Like, I don't have a sense of that. Do you know, Todd?
Todd Van Hook, DOT. Yeah, right now it just shows in the outer years of the STIP, so beyond, so this STIP is running on its last year and it expires in 2023. And so what all it shows in Amendment 5 is a placeholder for this project to be constructed sometime in the future. So there's no phase 2, 3, 7, or 4 in it. It's just a placeholder. And that placeholder allows us then really, since we haven't identified any funding for this project, to use that nomenclature in the STIP to chase grant money, if you will.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So I understand the sequencing. With the remainder of the state money, you're going to push this as far as you can forward. I know there's like a noise study and some design work being done. And then when the $3 million runs out, kind of like puts it on hold, freezes. Probably not in the current step with the amendment, but in the next step, there will be advocacy to move this through its typical kind of, I don't know, 3-phase approach, design, right of way, and then possibly construction if there's room in that step or further out. Okay, and the next step starts in 2024 for the state?
Yeah, time to help DOT. We'll start working on that STIP very soon. It has to be signed by the governor and ready to be enacted by October 1st of next year.
Which is fiscal year 24 for the state. Okay, got it.
Just one follow-up question. When you determine the usability of that, whether or not it's going to be compliant, you talk with local planning department, because I know we talk about parking, but there, you know, when you go from say rooming house to health services, there's probably other land use requirements. So do you talk to MOA planning department to understand what is everything required in say a health under land use for health services and rooming house? Or do you do that your own internal investigation?
I believe the appraisal includes all of the consultation necessary to determine the highest and best need or whatever that term is, but.
So you-
Yes, yeah. DOT. I think this discussion could take a variety of different turns as we, the right way process. Sorry, I don't have any specifics on that.
Okay. So you've used it a couple of times, the highest and best use. So DOT could say, hey, we're putting this highway through. There's this property here. We think the highest and best use would actually be some sort of industrial use or an open grassy field or something like that. And you could make your own determination as to the highest and best use for that property based on how that road is going to go. And so could you actually negate and say, well, I know you want to turn it into a health services or a treatment center, but we don't think that's the highest and best use. We think the highest and best use is an open grassy park. I'm just saying, is that possible?
I do not believe that's possible. I believe that it would be extremely difficult for anyone to argue with that.
Okay, I just keep hearing highest and best use, so, and who makes that determination?
I think it's more of a dialogue. But our appraisal would go out and they would do their analysis of the property, value of the property, and then that would be what we would use for our initial offer for the space of the property. In conversations with the property owner, they may choose to do their own appraisal. They may have different ideas for how the parcel could be used, and so that's where the back and forth.
I understand that. Okay.
Sounds like a real estate transaction, that it's a negotiated real estate transaction where there's just like two different varying points of view and you see if you can make a meeting of the minds, and ultimately, if you can't, have another tool in your toolbox, which is eminent domain, but that's kind of a tool of last resort.
It really is, and it's very expensive for us to go into eminent domain. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars in lawyers fees. So we really try to do everything we can to avoid that to come to an agreement. We can do administrative settlements that change the dollar amounts based on specific reasons. We have, again, the acquisition incentive program, we can help out. And we really try to work with property owners. If you come to us and say, look, we can work with you on this, but we really need that facility at least until 2025. And we can, when we're programming our STIP documents, we can say, okay, we're not going to be ready to go live with construction on this until no earlier than 2020. And we can do this.
Can I ask a self-inflammatory question? So free to ignore, but for Todd or for Wolfgang, when was the last time you bought and knocked down a building the size of the gold mine?
That large? Glen 34 to 42, phase one, the fairgrounds. You remember that two-story hotel right across from the fairgrounds? It's not as big as the goal plan was. But there were a lot of buildings we took out as a result of that project.
Last 5 years, no wonder.
So we've done some very with that. Right-of-way acquisition is incredibly complicated. The fireworks guy up there at Houston, who probably has all of $20,000 in old connexes. We have to actually build him a fire compliant explosives storage facility.
So how much,
It has an impact to that. property,
Location,
which will
location,
cost
location.
tens of millions of dollars. The Uniform Relocation Act is very generous. Like I said, if we knock on your door in 3 years and you have 20 families housed in that building, we have to provide housing for those families for 4 years after relocation. That's part of the federal. And so it really is a very generous program designed to protect the property.
So, because what prompted this whole conversation was the letter, but it was the cover to the letter that used the word condemnation. I just want to be crystal clear. DOT does not use the word condemnation unless it is going through an eminent domain process. Is that an accurate statement?
Not sure I'm good enough. I'm not a lawyer to cite.
Okay, well, I just,
The
like-
eminent domain is the authority that the department has with regard to acquisition of property for public projects.
Okay,
Condemnation, I think, is a vernacular within that eminent domain.
okay. So the two are tied together.
Yes.
Okay,
If I'm condemning you, it is
Nope.
with the authority of eminent domain
got it. Okay,
to procure that property for the public good.
okay, got it. Thank you. Thank you for entertaining all of these questions.
Happy to entertain it. Happy to continue to answer questions. Any other questions from the committee on the third set of project? Okay. Is there any public comments regarding this project?
There's that.
No, I think you did a
There
great
is-
job.
There is one person, yeah.
Oh, there is. Go ahead and please state your name and.
Yeah, hi, this is Emily Weiser. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I just wondered if we could get a little clarification on sort of the nature of the comments from the public that would be appropriate or sought for this STIP amendment. Like, are we talking about project design or timing or the funding source, or, what sort of comments are we looking for?
Mr. Van Hook, you want to answer that comment on the STIP comments?
Sure, Todd Van Hook, DOT. I don't think we put any restrictions on comments. I think at this time it's a little premature to talk specifically about projects because the project is pretty infancy or in its infancy stages. So primarily we focus in the STIP through funding and funding projects. But all comments are taken and answered and adjudicated.
Does that answer your question, Matt?
I guess more or less. But I guess I'm wondering sort of, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but like, I understand you'll consider all comments, but is there something that would be particularly relevant to this decision specific to the STIP amendment in terms of like whether this project is included in the STIP, things like that? I don't know if that's any more clear as a question.
Yeah, I think, again, Todd Van Hook, I think if you're, the STIP comments are basically around timing and funding and maybe allocation, time, program funding, types of funding, stuff like that. But project specific questions are probably not as appropriate for STIP comments.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Any other questions from the public online or otherwise? Okay, thank you, Noel. Appreciate it. Okay, item 7, I think we're done with item 6 is, any general commission?
No, sir.
Okay. Item 8, committee comments, any comments from the committee at all? Okay, so I got a few informational things to put out. Got some good news. There were 4 safety corridors within the Central Region, Parks Highway, Goose Bay, Seward Highway, and Sterling. Effective today, we have decommissioned the Parks Highway and Safety Corps. And that's as a result of the completion of the divided 4-lane project that went out to Big Lake. So that project is all complete, and so the double fines for speeding in that corridor have been removed. So
have that in there.
so you can put the metal to the metal. Don't get yourself a normal speeding ticket, but only regular points. Anyway, we're really pleased about that. Once Goose Bay is done, that designation will also come on. And we're working to get a Sterling Highway design built out next year for construction. And that, when that's complete, that's connecting the 4 lanes between Sterling and Soldotna. When that's complete, that safety corridor will go away. And then, of course, the larger project south of Anchorage. That's going to take a few more years. And we're hoping to get that done too. So good news on the safety front for folks. STIP Amendment 5, Mr. Van Hove, I know you've talked to a bit of it already. That's out for review. The end of October is the due date for public comments. Todd, is there anything they should know about STIP Amendment 5 that's relevant other than Stewart 36 to Anchorage?
Hi, Dan, DOT. STIP Amendment 5 is generally, besides 36th Avenue, is just kind of a cleanup. Central Region, we don't have a whole lot in there. It's more for, most of our improvements or increases were done in STIP Amendment 4. So this is kind of just a cleanup and catch up. We will be having a STIP Amendment 6 beginning after the first of the year. And as I said earlier, as well, working on a new STIP this summer. So there'll be plenty of opportunities to comment. But STIP Amendment 5 for us, as I say, us in Central Region, it's pretty limited other than the 36th Avenue project.
Thank you. As most of you saw, we had another bridge strike the other day. So we are opening tomorrow the RFP that will replace that girder, Artillery Road Bridge. We do not expect another bridge apocalypse. We're not routing the entire Glen Highway through Eagle River. I promised Amy Dombrowski that I would not do that.
Let her know.
Okay.
All the Eagle River says thank you. And the valley, actually.
We will probably have limited lane closures at night on a weekend. They will be very short from 10 p.m. to 5 in the morning. So with a minor amount of traffic routed through Eagle River. It'll be a fairly minor repair. We hope to avoid those in the future. Transportation prayer is today out for the Valley. That's at the Menard Sports Center between 3 and 7 o'clock. So inclined, that's a great event. The Anchorage Transportation Fair will be on 12th of January out at the Alaska Airlines Center from 3 to 7 as well. So if you can scribble that down on your date books, that's a good thing to attend. Dowling Road, we've got the north-south traffic over the top of the bridge, and by the end of next week, they'll come up, which will relieve a lot of pressure that everybody has felt on roads like Tudor and other east-west corridors. So we're very excited to get that back open. We will still have a lot of stuff to clean up next year, but we will not have complete closures of that interchange like we did this year. So really appreciate the traveling public's patience as we get that improved. And that'll be a big improvement. The traveling public with things. Also, we did do a little temporary repair on the Minnesota Drive going down through Westchester area there. But that project will be mill and paved and done officially permanently next year. So we wanted to get a little bit of smear coat down on that, get those ruts repaired right now. Got that done. And then the other smaller projects, the intersections at C Street and Tudor, C Street and Diamond are just about complete. There's a good one as well. That's the news from DOT. Any other last minute comments from anyone? Okay. All right. Any public comments at all?
You have one person with their hand up. Cheryl would like to comment. Go on mute.
Cheryl, if you'd like to comment, go ahead.
Yeah, Cheryl, we can't hear you if you're trying to speak, so. Okay, any other public comments out there? Anybody else with their hand raised? Okay, given that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
Seconded, any objections? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Thank you, everyone. 2:45.